The morning sun cast long shadows across the Rolling Creek Ranch as Marcus Whitfield stepped out of his black Range Rover. At 62 years old, he owned more land than some small countries, with cattle ranches stretching across 3 states. His boots clicked against the cobblestone path leading to the main stables, each step echoing the confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Marcus had started with a single horse and 200 borrowed dollars 40 years ago. Now, his ranch operations employed over 300 people and his prize-winning horses commanded 6-figure prices at auction. The local newspapers called him the Cattle King of Colorado, but Marcus preferred to think of himself as a simple rancher who had gotten lucky. Today felt different, though. He had received a call from his stable manager, Roberto Sanchez, about a new stallion that had been brought in during the night. The horse had been found wandering near the highway, thin and obviously neglected. Roberto's voice had carried an unusual tension when he described the animal. "Mr. Whitfield, you need to see this horse yourself," Roberto had said over the phone. "There's something about him that doesn't add up. He's in rough shape, but his bloodline. I think you'll want to take a look personally." Marcus pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the stable. The familiar smell of hay and leather greeted him, mixed with the earthy scent of horses. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. The stable housed 30 of his finest horses, each worth more than most people's homes. Roberto emerged from one of the stalls, his weathered face creased with concern. At 55, the Mexican immigrant had worked on the ranch for 23 years. Marcus trusted his judgment about horses more than anyone else's. Roberto had an almost supernatural ability to read the animals, understanding their moods and needs in ways that amazed everyone who worked with him. "Morning, Roberto. Where's this mystery horse you called me about?" Roberto gestured toward the far end of the stable. "End stall, Mr. Whitfield. But I should warn you, he's not like the strays we usually get. This one has a story." They walked past the other horses, magnificent animals with glossy coats and alert eyes. Arabian mares worth $250,000 each turned their heads as they passed. Championship bloodlines represented generations of careful breeding and astronomical investments. At the end stall, Marcus stopped cold. Inside stood a stallion that might have been majestic once, but now looked like a shadow of nobility. The horse's ribs showed clearly through his dull coat. His mane was tangled and dirty, and several cuts and scrapes marked his legs. But, despite his condition, something in the animal's bearing suggested this was no ordinary stray. "My God," Marcus whispered. "How long has he been wandering?" "Hard to say," Roberto replied, running his hand along the stall door. "Could be weeks, maybe months. But, look at his conformation, Mr. Whitfield. Look at the way he carries himself, even in this condition." Marcus studied the horse more carefully. Even malnourished and exhausted, the stallion had an unmistakable elegance. His head was perfectly proportioned, his legs long and straight. The bone structure spoke of exceptional breeding, the kind of genetics that produced champions. "Have you checked for any identification? Brands, microchips, tattoos?" "That's the thing," Roberto said, pulling out his phone. "I found something, but it doesn't make sense." He showed Marcus a photo of the horse's neck, where a faded tattoo was barely visible beneath the matted hair. The numbers and letters were difficult to read, but Marcus could make out enough to feel his breath catch. "Is that what I think it is?" Marcus asked, leaning closer to the phone screen. "If I'm reading it right, yes sir. That's a Jockey Club registration number. This isn't just a purebred, Mr. Whitfield. This is a thoroughbred racehorse." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Thoroughbred racehorses, especially stallions with proven bloodlines, were worth fortunes. Finding one wandering loose on a highway was like discovering a Picasso painting in a garage sale. "We need to contact the Jockey Club immediately," Marcus said. "Get that registration number verified." "Already did," Roberto replied. "Made the call an hour ago. They're sending someone out this afternoon with the records." Marcus opened the stall door slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The stallion watched him warily but didn't back away. Up close, the evidence of neglect was even more heartbreaking. This magnificent animal had clearly been starved and abandoned. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, extending his hand for the horse to smell. "You're safe now." The stallion sniffed tentatively, then allowed Marcus to touch his neck. Despite everything he had endured, there was still trust in those dark eyes. Marcus had been around horses his entire life, but this animal's spirit moved him in a way he couldn't explain. "Roberto, I want Dr. Martinez out here within the hour. Full medical examination, blood work, the complete treatment. Whatever this horse needs." "Yes, sir." "Should I set up the quarantine stall?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "Put him in the VIP stall. The one with the private paddock. This boy has suffered enough." As they prepared to move the stallion, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this horse's arrival was more than coincidence. In his 40 years of ranching, he had seen plenty of abandoned animals. But something about this particular horse felt significant, as if fate had guided the animal to his ranch. Dr. Elena Martinez arrived within the hour, her veterinary truck loaded with equipment. At 38, she was the most respected equine veterinarian in the region, known for her gentle touch with traumatized animals. Marcus had used her services for years and trusted her judgment completely. "Roberto filled me in on the basics," Dr. Martinez said, setting down her medical bag. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The examination took nearly 2 hours. Dr. Martinez was thorough, checking everything from the horse's teeth to his hooves. She drew blood samples, took X-rays, and carefully documented every injury and sign of neglect. "Malnutrition is the primary concern," she explained to Marcus and Roberto. "He's lost probably 30% of his body weight. Dehydration, some infected cuts, but nothing that won't heal with proper care." "How long?" Marcus asked. "With the right nutrition and treatment? 6 months to get him back to full health. Maybe less if he responds well to rehabilitation." Marcus nodded, already mentally calculating the costs. Feed, supplements, medical care, training time, facility usage. Even conservative estimates put the rehabilitation at $20,000 or more. For a horse of unknown value and uncertain ownership, it was a significant gamble. But, looking at the stallion, Marcus knew he couldn't walk away. Something about this horse called to him, awakening the same instinct that had guided his business decisions for 4 decades. "Do whatever it takes," he told Dr. Martinez. "Money is no object." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself returning to the stallion's stall repeatedly. Each time, the horse seemed slightly more alert, as if responding to the sudden influx of care and attention. Roberto had already started him on a carefully measured feeding program, small amounts of high-quality feed every few hours. "Mr. Whitfield," Roberto called from the office. "The Jockey Club representative is here." Marcus walked to the stable office where a young woman in a business suit was setting up a laptop computer. She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, a registration specialist from the Thoroughbred Registry. "I understand you found a horse with a possible registration tattoo," she asked, pulling up database screens on her computer. "That's right." Roberto photographed the marking. "The numbers are faded, but we think we can make them out." Sarah studied the photo carefully, typing various combinations into her search system. After several minutes, her expression changed dramatically. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, staring at her screen. "I think I know who this horse is." Marcus leaned forward. "What did you find?" "If this registration number is correct, this horse is Thunder's legacy, foaled 8 years ago. He's descended from Stormcat and Sunday Silence bloodlines. His stud fee was $50,000. The office fell silent. Marcus felt his knees go weak. A stallion with that kind of pedigree was worth millions of dollars. "Where has he been?" Roberto asked. "How does a horse like that end up wandering a highway?" Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more records. "According to our files, Thunder's legacy was sold to Blackwood Farms in Kentucky 3 years ago for $2.7 million. But there's a note here about some kind of legal dispute." She continued reading, her frown deepening. It looks like Blackwood Farms went into bankruptcy 18 months ago. There was litigation over the horses, disputes between creditors. Several animals went missing during the legal proceedings. Marcus sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. This wasn't just a neglected horse. This was a multi-million-dollar animal who had somehow survived abandonment during a corporate collapse. What happens now? Marcus asked. I need to make some calls, Sarah replied. Contact the bankruptcy court, the insurance companies, the original owners. This is going to be complicated. As evening approached, Marcus stood by the stallion's stall, watching the magnificent animal slowly eat his first proper meal in months. The horse's eyes already looked brighter, and he seemed to be gaining strength by the hour. Roberto joined him at the stall door. Mr. Whitefield, I've been thinking. If this horse is really worth what that lady says, there are going to be a lot of people looking for him. Marcus nodded grimly. He had been thinking the same thing. Lawyers, creditors, insurance companies, original breeders. Everyone would want a piece of Thunder's legacy now that he had been found. But, looking at the stallion, Marcus felt a fierce protectiveness rising in his chest. This horse had been abandoned, left to die. Whoever had owned him before had failed in their basic responsibility to care for him. Roberto, I want you to document everything. Every detail of his condition when we found him, every treatment we provide. I want a complete record. You think there's going to be a fight? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Thunder's legacy eat with the careful hunger of an animal who had known starvation. I think, Marcus said finally, that this horse has already been through enough fighting. Whatever happens next, I'm going to make sure he's protected. As night fell over Rolling Creek Ranch, Marcus remained by the stall. He had built his empire through shrewd business decisions and calculated risks. But this felt different. This wasn't about money or profit margins. This was about a magnificent creature who had somehow found his way to safety, and Marcus was determined to make sure that safety lasted. Thunder's legacy lifted his head from his feed bucket and looked directly at Marcus. In that moment, something passed between man and horse, an understanding that went beyond ownership or legal documents. Whatever complications lay ahead, Marcus knew his life had just changed forever. The stallion had arrived at Rolling Creek Ranch as a broken, abandoned animal. Now, as Marcus watched him regain his strength with each passing hour, he realized that perhaps they had both been rescued today. 3 weeks had passed since Thunder's legacy arrived at Rolling Creek Ranch, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The stallion's ribs no longer showed through his coat, which had begun to regain its natural luster. Dr. Martinez visited daily, monitoring his progress and adjusting his treatment plan. Marcus found himself spending hours each day at the stallion's paddock, often arriving before dawn and staying until well after sunset. His ranch foreman, Jake Sullivan, had started joking that Marcus was more devoted to Thunder's legacy than to his own business empire. The joke wasn't far from the truth. Marcus had postponed 3 major business meetings and turned down a lucrative deal in Texas, all to be present for the horse's rehabilitation. Something about Thunder's legacy had awakened a passion in Marcus that he hadn't felt in years. Mr. Whitfield, Roberto called from across the stable. You have visitors. Marcus looked up from where he had been watching Thunder's legacy graze in his private paddock. 3 people in expensive suits were walking toward him, followed by a 4th person carrying a briefcase and what appeared to be legal documents. The lead figure was a tall, thin man with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He extended his hand with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to getting his way. Mr. Whitfield? I'm Richard Blackwood III, former owner of Blackwood Farms. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Marcus shook the offered hand but said nothing. Behind Blackwood stood a stern-looking woman with auburn hair and a younger man who was clearly a lawyer. This is my attorney, James Morrison, and Rebecca Walsh from Pacific Equine Insurance, Blackwood continued. We're here about Thunder's legacy. I assumed as much, Marcus replied evenly. Though I'm curious how a horse that belongs to you ended up half-dead on a Colorado highway. Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. There were some unfortunate circumstances during our corporate restructuring. Several horses were temporarily relocated, and, in the confusion, Thunder's Legacy apparently escaped from the transport facility. Temporarily relocated? Marcus felt his temper rising. That horse was starving. He'd been wandering for months. Rebecca Walsh stepped forward, opening a folder filled with documents. Mr. Whitfield, according to our insurance records, Thunder's Legacy was reported stolen 18 months ago. We've been searching for him ever since. Stolen? Roberto asked, joining the group. By who? That's under investigation, the lawyer, Morrison, replied smoothly. But, the important thing is that the horse has been recovered. We're prepared to arrange immediate transport back to Kentucky. Marcus looked at Thunder's Legacy, who was watching the group of strangers with obvious anxiety. The stallion's ears were pinned back, and he had retreated to the far side of his paddock. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Marcus said. This horse was abandoned. I've spent considerable resources on his rehabilitation. I have legal rights as his rescuer. Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Mr. Whitfield, I admire your attachment to the animal, truly. But, Thunder's Legacy is worth over $3 million. This isn't some farm rescue situation. $3 million? Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's interesting. Because when I contacted other breeding facilities about his bloodline, the estimates I received were considerably higher. He saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Blackwood's face before the mask of confidence returned. Regardless of his value, Morrison interjected, the ownership is clear. We have all the documentation proving Mr. Blackwood's legal claim. Do you? Marcus asked. Because when I spoke with the bankruptcy court handling Blackwood Farms, they had some very interesting information about Thunder's Legacy. The group exchanged glances, and Marcus knew he had struck a nerve. What kind of information? Rebecca Walsh asked carefully. It seems that Thunder's Legacy was used as collateral for several loans during Blackwood Farms' financial difficulties. When the farm went into bankruptcy, he was technically owned by 3 different creditors simultaneously. Marcus pulled out his own folder, which had grown thick with legal documents over the past 3 weeks. His own attorneys had been busy. It also turns out that Thunder's Legacy was never properly transferred to Blackwood Farms in the first place. The original sale documents were incomplete, missing several required signatures and notarizations. Blackwood's face was turning red. That's a technicality. I paid for that horse fair and square. With money you didn't have, using a company that was already insolvent, Marcus replied. My lawyers tell me the original sale could be considered fraudulent. Morrison stepped forward aggressively. Mr. Whitfield, you're interfering with the recovery of stolen property. We could have you charged with theft. Could you? Marcus smiled for the first time since the group had arrived. Because my attorneys also discovered something interesting about the night Thunder's Legacy supposedly disappeared. He opened his folder and pulled out several photographs. These are security camera images from the transport facility where Thunder's Legacy was allegedly stolen. They show your client, Mr. Blackwood, personally loading Thunder's Legacy and 3 other horses into an unmarked trailer at 2 a.m. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Rebecca Walsh was studying the photographs with obvious concern. Richard, she said quietly, you told me the horses were stolen by unknown parties. There's a reasonable explanation, Blackwood said quickly. I was moving them to a secure location to protect them from creditors. Into the Colorado wilderness? Marcus asked. Because these photos show the trailer heading west on Interstate 70, toward the mountains. That's not exactly a secure facility. Dr. Martinez approached the group, carrying her medical bag and a thick file folder. Mr. Whitfield, I have Thunder's Legacy's complete medical evaluation. You might want to see this. She handed Marcus the folder, and his expression darkened as he read. What is it? Roberto asked. Dr. Martinez found evidence that Thunder's Legacy had been systematically neglected for months before he was abandoned. malnutrition, untreated injuries, signs of prolonged stress, and confinement. Marcus looked directly at Blackwood. This horse wasn't stolen, was he? You dumped him in the wilderness because you couldn't afford to feed him and didn't want to deal with the legal complications of his ownership. That's a serious accusation, Morrison warned. It's about to get more serious, Marcus replied. Because I'm filing charges for animal cruelty and abandonment. I'm also suing for the full cost of Thunder's Legacy's rehabilitation and ongoing care. Rebecca Walsh was backing away from the group. Richard, if what Mr. Whitfield is saying is true, Pacific Equine Insurance will not be defending you in this matter. In fact, we may be pursuing our own legal action for insurance fraud. Blackwood turned on her angrily. You can't just walk away from this. We had an agreement. Our agreement was based on your representation that the horse was stolen, she replied coldly. Not that you abandoned him to die in the wilderness. As the insurance representative walked back toward the parking area, Marcus felt the tide of the confrontation shifting decisively in his favor. Mr. Blackwood, he said quietly, I suggest you and your lawyer leave my property before I have you arrested for trespassing. This isn't over, Blackwood snarled. That horse is worth a fortune, and I'm not walking away from him. Actually, you already did walk away from him, Marcus replied. On a highway in the middle of nowhere, where you left him to starve to death. After the group departed, Marcus stood alone with Roberto and Dr. Martinez, watching Thunder's Legacy slowly approach the fence line again. The stallion had remained agitated during the entire confrontation, clearly recognizing Blackwood's voice and presence. That horse knows him, Dr. Martinez observed. Look at how stressed he became when that man started talking. Will they be back? Roberto asked. Marcus nodded grimly. Men like Blackwood don't give up easily. But I think we've bought ourselves some time. Over the following days, Marcus's attorneys worked around the clock to solidify his legal position. The evidence against Blackwood was overwhelming, but that didn't mean the fight was over. Other parties began emerging with claims on Thunder's Legacy. The original breeder, Whispering Oaks Farm, filed papers claiming they had never been fully paid for the stallion. 2 different banks produced loan documents showing Thunder's Legacy as collateral. A pension fund that had invested in Blackwood Farms demanded the horse be sold to recover their losses. Marcus found himself in the middle of a legal battlefield, with Thunder's Legacy as the prize everyone wanted to claim. But, as he watched the stallion grow stronger each day, Marcus became more determined than ever to protect him. This wasn't about money or business anymore. It was about justice for an animal who had suffered because of human greed and negligence. Thunder's Legacy had slowly begun to trust again, allowing Marcus to groom him personally and even accepting carrots from his hand. The bond between man and horse was growing stronger daily. You know, Dr. Martinez said during one of her visits, I've never seen a horse recover from trauma this severe so completely. Usually, there are lasting behavioral issues, trust problems. But Thunder's Legacy seems to have an unusual capacity for forgiveness. Marcus stroked the stallion's neck, feeling the powerful muscles that were finally filling out properly again. Maybe he knows he's safe now. Or maybe, Roberto suggested, he knows you're fighting for him. As the legal battle intensified, Marcus made a decision that surprised even his own attorneys. Rather than wait for the courts to sort out Thunder's Legacy's ownership, he announced his intention to adopt the stallion regardless of the outcome. Even if someone else is awarded legal ownership, he told his lawyer, I want to purchase Thunder's Legacy from them at fair market value. Whatever it takes. His attorney, Patricia Chen, looked concerned. Marcus, fair market value for a stallion of his caliber could be $8 to $10 million. Are you prepared for that kind of expenditure? Marcus looked out his office window toward the paddock where Thunder's Legacy was grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. Patricia, I've spent my entire life building wealth. What's the point of having money if you don't use it for something that matters? And this horse matters that much to you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. This horse represents everything I believe in. Second chances, fighting back from impossible odds, refusing to give up even when everyone abandons you. he turned back to Patricia. Thunder's legacy survived months of abandonment because he had the will to keep going. The least I can do is fight as hard for him as he fought for himself. That evening, as Marcus made his final rounds of the stables, he found Thunder's legacy standing at the fence line, as if waiting for him. The stallion nickered softly when he saw Marcus approaching. "Tomorrow brings another day of lawyers and paperwork, boy," Marcus said, offering the horse an apple. "But, whatever happens, you're not going back to people who would hurt you. That's a promise." Thunder's legacy crunched the apple thoughtfully, his intelligent eyes studying Marcus's face. In that moment, Marcus felt certain that the horse understood exactly what was at stake. The legal war for Thunder's legacy was far from over. But Marcus had faced impossible odds before and won. This time, he wasn't just fighting for profit or business advantage. This time, he was fighting for something that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. He was fighting for loyalty, for justice, and for the right of a magnificent creature to live free from the cruelty and greed that had nearly destroyed him. As Marcus walked back toward his house, he could hear Thunder's legacy moving restlessly in his stall, and he wondered if the stallion was dreaming of the wilderness where he had almost died, or of the future where he would finally be truly safe. 6 months had passed since the legal battle over Thunder's legacy began, and Marcus Whitfield had learned that money couldn't solve every problem. Despite having the best attorneys in Colorado, the case had become a tangled mess of competing claims, jurisdictional disputes, and procedural delays. Thunder's legacy, meanwhile, had made a complete physical recovery. The magnificent stallion now looked like the champion he was born to be, with a gleaming coat, perfect muscle tone, and an alert, intelligent demeanor that drew admiration from everyone who saw him. Marcus had hired a professional trainer, Elena Vasquez, to work with Thunder's legacy. Elena was known throughout the horse world for her ability to rehabilitate traumatized animals. Under her careful guidance, the stallion had not only recovered his physical strength but had also begun to display the remarkable athletic ability that made his bloodline so valuable. "Mr. Whitfield," Elena called from the training ring, "you need to see this." Marcus walked over to where Elena was working with Thunder's legacy on basic dressage movements. The stallion's natural grace and responsiveness were breathtaking to watch. "His movement is extraordinary," Elena explained. "Perfect balance, incredible power, and he learns new commands almost instantly. This horse has championship potential in multiple disciplines." Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. That morning, he had received news from his attorney that the legal situation had taken an unexpected turn. Patricia Chin arrived at the ranch shortly after lunch, carrying a briefcase full of documents and wearing the expression of someone who had either very good news or very bad news. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, settling into his office. "I just came from a meeting with all the parties involved in Thunder's legacy's case." "What's the verdict?" Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "It's complicated. The bankruptcy court has ruled that the original sale to Blackwood Farms was indeed invalid due to fraudulent documentation." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "That's good news, isn't it?" "Partially. It means Blackwood has no claim to Thunder's legacy. But it also means the horse legally belongs to his original breeder, Whispering Oaks Farm." Marcus's heart sank. He had grown to love Thunder's legacy like his own child. The thought of losing him now, after everything they had been through together, was unbearable. "What does Whispering Oaks want?" "That's where things get interesting," Patricia continued. "I spoke with Margaret Sinclair, the owner of Whispering Oaks. She's 83 years old and in poor health. She wants to sell Thunder's legacy, but she has specific conditions." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of conditions?" "She wants to meet you personally. She wants to see Thunder's legacy and verify his condition. And she wants to hear the story of his rescue directly from you." "When?" "She's flying in from Kentucky tomorrow morning." That evening, Marcus found himself standing by Thunder's legacy stall, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The stallion approached the fence and gently nuzzled his hand, a gesture that had become their evening ritual. "Tomorrow might change everything, boy," Marcus whispered. But, whatever happens, I want you to know that these past months have meant more to me than all my business success combined. Thunder's legacy seemed to understand the weight of the moment. He stood quietly, allowing Marcus to stroke his neck and mane. Roberto joined them at the stall. "Mr. Whitfield, I've been thinking. If this lady decides not to sell him to us, what happens then?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. "I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But, I'm not giving up without a fight." Margaret Sinclair arrived at Rolling Creek Ranch the next morning in a chauffeured sedan, accompanied by a young woman who introduced herself as Margaret's granddaughter and business manager, Sarah Sinclair. Margaret was a small, elegant woman with silver hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with sharp intelligence. Despite her age, she moved with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life around horses. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, extending her hand, "I understand you've been taking care of my Thunder's legacy." "Yes, ma'am. It's been my privilege." Margaret nodded approvingly at his respectful tone. "I'd like to see him, please. And, I want to hear the whole story." As they walked to the stables, Marcus told Margaret everything. He described finding Thunder's legacy half dead by the highway, the months of rehabilitation, the legal battle with Blackwood, and the ongoing fight to protect the stallion from those who would exploit him. When they reached Thunder's legacy's stall, Margaret stopped and drew in a sharp breath. The stallion was standing in a shaft of morning sunlight, his coat gleaming, every inch the magnificent animal she had bred 8 years earlier. "My God," she whispered. "Look at him. I was afraid." She trailed off, but Marcus understood. She had been afraid that her prized stallion had been permanently damaged by his ordeal. Thunder's legacy approached the stall door, recognizing that this visitor was somehow different from the others. Margaret extended her hand, and the stallion sniffed it carefully before allowing her to touch his nose. "Hello, Thunder," she said softly. "I've missed you, boy." The stallion seemed to remember her. He nickered softly and pushed his head against her hand, seeking the affection he remembered from his early years at Whispering Oaks. Margaret turned to Marcus, and he was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, I want you to know that Thunder's legacy was my husband's last gift to me before he passed away 5 years ago. We bred his bloodline specifically to create this horse. He represents 40 years of careful genetic planning and more money than I care to calculate." Marcus felt his hopes sinking. If the horse meant that much to her personally, she would never sell him. "But," Margaret continued, "I also want you to know that I failed him. When my farm ran into financial trouble, I sold him to Blackwood because I thought he would be better cared for at a larger facility. I trusted the wrong person, and Thunder's legacy nearly died because of my poor judgment." She stroked the stallion's neck gently. "You saved his life, Mr. Whitfield. You gave him back his dignity and his health. You fought for him when no one else would." Margaret turned to face Marcus directly. "I came here today prepared to take Thunder's legacy home with me. But, watching him with you, seeing how he responds to your presence, I realized that would be another mistake." Marcus held his breath, afraid to hope. "Thunder's legacy belongs here, with the man who proved he would sacrifice everything to protect him. I'm not here to sell him to you, Mr. Whitfield. I'm here to give him to you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Ma'am, I can't accept such a generous gift. Thunder's legacy is worth millions of dollars." Margaret smiled for the first time since arriving. "Young man, I'm 83 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and no children to leave it to. What I don't have is the peace of mind that comes from knowing Thunder's legacy is safe and loved." She looked back at the stallion, who was watching their conversation with obvious interest. "Besides," she added, "there are conditions to this gift." Marcus nodded, knowing there had to be a catch. "First, Thunder's legacy must never be sold or given away without my written consent. If you ever decide you can't care for him properly, he comes back to Whispering Oaks." "Agreed. Second, I want breeding rights. If you ever decide to put him at stud, Whispering Oaks gets first choice of mares and a percentage of the breeding fees." "Of course."
Third, I want regular updates on his health and happiness. Photos, veterinary reports, training progress. I want to know that he's thriving. You'll get monthly reports, Marcus promised.
Margaret smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes.
Then, it's settled. Thunder's legacy is officially yours, Mr. Whitfield. Love him well. The paperwork took most of the afternoon to complete.
Sarah Sinclair, who turned out to be a sharp lawyer in addition to being Margaret's granddaughter, handled the legal details with efficient professionalism. As evening approached, Margaret insisted on spending time alone with Thunder's legacy, saying goodbye to the horse who represented so much of her family's history. Marcus watched from a distance as the elderly woman whispered to the stallion, occasionally wiping away tears. When she finally rejoined the group, she seemed to have found peace with her decision. "Take good care of him," she told Marcus simply. After the Sinclairs departed for the airport, Marcus found himself alone with Thunder's legacy for the first time as the horse's official owner. The magnitude of what had just happened was still sinking in. Roberto joined him at the stall, shaking his head in amazement. "Mr. Whitfield, in 23 years of working with horses, I have never seen anything like what just happened." Marcus nodded, still somewhat stunned. "Roberto, I came out to these stables 6 months ago to look at a stray horse. I had no idea it would change my entire life." Thunder's legacy seemed to sense the change in his status. He moved to the stall door and looked directly at Marcus, as if he understood that he finally had a permanent home. "You know what this means, don't you, boy?" Marcus asked, offering the stallion a carrot. "You're stuck with me now. No more wondering where you belong or who's going to take care of you." Elena Vasquez approached with a training schedule in her hand. "Mr. Whitfield, now that the legal issues are settled, we should talk about Thunder's legacy's future. With his bloodline and natural ability, he could compete at the highest levels in several disciplines." Marcus considered this. He had the resources to campaign Thunder's legacy as a show horse, to prove to the world just how special this animal truly was. But, looking at the stallion grazing peacefully in his paddock, Marcus realized that competition and glory weren't what mattered most. "Elena, I want you to continue his training, but not for competition. Train him for his own enjoyment, for his mental and physical health. If he shows interest in a particular discipline, we'll pursue it. But I'm not going to push him to achieve anything except happiness." Elena smiled. "I think that's exactly what he needs. After everything he's been through, he deserves to just be a horse for a while." As the sun set over Rolling Creek Ranch, Marcus stood watching Thunder's legacy run freely in his paddock. The stallion moved with joy and power, finally, able to express the magnificent spirit that had kept him alive during those terrible months in the wilderness. Marcus thought about Margaret Sinclair's words about loving Thunder's legacy well. It was a responsibility he accepted gladly, knowing that this horse had already given him more than he could ever repay. The wealthy ranch tycoon who had entered his stable 6 months ago looking for a horse to buy had found something infinitely more valuable. He had found a creature whose courage and resilience had taught him that true worth couldn't be measured in dollars. Thunder's legacy raised his head and looked toward where Marcus stood, their eyes meeting across the paddock. In that moment, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that he had gained more than just a horse. He had gained a reminder of what really mattered in life: loyalty, compassion, and the willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Thunder's legacy tossed his head and galloped toward the fence, arriving at a controlled stop just inches from where Marcus stood. The stallion extended his head over the fence, gently touching Marcus's shoulder with his nose. "I love you too, boy," Marcus whispered, understanding that this magnificent animal had chosen him just as surely as he had chosen to save Thunder's legacy. As night fell over the ranch, Marcus finally understood what his heart had been trying to tell him from the very beginning. Sometimes the most valuable treasures come to us not through careful planning or shrewd business deals, but through simple acts of kindness and the willingness to open our hearts to those in need. Thunder's legacy was safe at last, and, in saving him, Marcus had somehow managed to save a part of himself he hadn't even known was lost.